I have known you for so long, but I don't think I ever shared a screen with you, right? You never.
I don't think we've done video. We have done selfies and stuff.
We have done the text interviews with you, but never done video interviews. So this is like an excellent opportunity for me also to talk about a lot of things. So first of all, Dirk, tell us, what are you doing these days?
I'm the Chief Open Source Officer at VMware, so I'm in charge of the Open Source Program Office. We are handling everything related to open source, from typical inbound compliance, outbound contributions. The Open Source Technology Center reports up into me, so a group of engineers that are contributing to upstream projects. And of course, I'm involved on the strategic level with what the company does in and around open source, our products that either integrate open source or attach to open source, interact with open source projects. So it's a fairly broad role, and I think we are the first company that has this as a VP C-level role. So I'm, as I said, Chief Open Source Officer, which I think is a big signal to how important we think this is for the future in our markets.
I mean, and you have been open source world forever. I remember then when I was still in India doing my journalism and I started, I approached Intel back in those days and they said, oh, talk to Dirk, So I from all those, like, it's been like 12 or 13 years now.
It's been almost 30 for me.
Yes.
So I started free software in the very late 80s, and then 91 I started with Linux. And been involved ever since. So my whole professional life has always been around open source software.
What got you into?
So I was at a university and I was using Emacs at that time, and found a bug and fixed the bug, which is what usually gets you into it. And then I became a sysadmin at the department and hated the green terminal that I had and tried to use Minix for that. Was on Comp OS Minix and saw Linus's post and reached out to Linus, and that's really what got me into Linux. But for many years it was always scratching your own itch. It was something that didn't work for me that I wanted to fix and I got engaged in, and that really is what kind of sucked me in.
And once you're there, and like look at Linus or all these people, nobody gets bored, It's just because so much is happening nowadays. It's actually picking up. The adoption of Linux and open source is just amazing.
I hear people talking about being bored, and I wonder how that feels, because I can't imagine being bored.
Yeah.
They're just being here at the OSLS. There are so many projects. I'm like, I want to have the time to read up on it, to do more, to play with it. There are so many projects that I know what they do, but I haven't had the time to actually work with them myself. And so this idea of not knowing what to do seems totally crazy to me.
And even the most fascinating thing is that these are not the projects which are like, it's actually affecting our real world,
Yes.
All whether you talk about Kubernetes or whatever you talk, they're like, I mean, when you call an Uber or Lyft, whatever, you're actually touching those technologies. So when I call an Uber or Lyft, when they talk, what do you do? I explain, and it's like fascinating. So you cannot get bored ever.
But see, you don't even need to go that high tech. I mean, look at yesterday's talk by the Office Depot, Home Depot guys.
Yes.
And it's like every brick and mortar company today thinks of themselves as a technology company. This has so fundamentally changed the world that we live in, and is so fundamentally impacting the way companies innovate, whether they are on paper technology companies or whether they are in completely different businesses and are using technology to innovate.
Right.
It is truly global and truly affecting anything and everything these days.
Right. So how important is open source for VMware?
So for us, open source is the way a lot of our customers think about their innovation. More and more of the innovation is driven by application developers and by the stacks that they use. And for us, it's really important that we find ways to help them move these developments into production. A very typical scenario is that you have someone who works on their laptop, develops a great idea, and does that with an open source stack, and then goes to their IT department and says, hey, let's run this. And the IT department says, that's kind of, you're making a lot of assumptions that aren't true for our production environment. And so to ease that transition, to make it possible for people who want to use Kubernetes, for example, but they don't want to use it just in a third-party cloud, and they don't want to use it just on 5 systems, but they want to have the ability to roll it out in a large scale across multiple data centers, manage the hardware below it, manage, how do you do internal accounting, for example?
Right.
One of those completely trivial questions. Okay, I want to be able to bill back my departments for the compute time and the network bandwidth that they've used. How do you do that?
Right.
The open source projects tend to not care about what we typically call day 2 operation. Once you have it running, awesome. But as an IT operation, you really care about the longevity and the scalability and all of this at a much larger scale, at a much larger footprint than many open source projects look at this. And that, I think, is something where VMware has a lot to offer. So if you look at Kubernetes, Kubernetes assumes that you have a virtualized network. Well, how does that work? How do you do firewalling? How do you do segmentation? How do you assign addresses? How do you routing? So we have a product that does that for you. Kubernetes assumes that either you're completely stateless or you have a distributed persistent storage engine behind that. Again, if you think about enterprise scale across multiple data centers, that is something that we have with vSAN. So a lot of the hard technological problems that people try to solve, we actually have enterprise class solutions for, and we want to make sure that people can use those with their open source infrastructure. Yesterday, when you heard the keynote about serverless, and one of the key things that he said I thought was so interesting, where he said, we want to make it really easy to solve problems by removing all the questions about infrastructure and how you run all this and make it somebody else's problem. And I guess one way to think about this is that we are that somebody else who can solve all these hard infrastructure problems so that you can focus on how you solve your business problems. So Alex Ellis, the founder of OpenFast, just joined the Open Source Technology Center at VMware. And he is focused very much on how can you run functions as a service and how can you make it easy for people who want to do that. And he has this 60 seconds, from 0 to fast in 60 seconds, is one of his presentations. And what I find so fascinating is that this always assumes that you have a solid infrastructure behind it.
Right.
A lot of the innovation is about abstracting things out, getting further away from the nitty-gritty of how you run your data center.
Right. You mentioned open technology. Did we touch upon that, Open Technology Center at?
So part of my team is the Open Source Technology Center. So we have a group of engineers who are primarily focused on upstream contributions. So their day job is not driven by a product or a service that we sell, but it's driven by making these upstream projects better. And we're engaged in OpenFast, in Kubernetes, in the Linux kernel, in a fairly broad set of open source projects that we think are important and valuable to our customers, and that have touch points with what we do as a software company. But the focus of this team is very much upstream.
And in addition to contributing to this upstream, you have also open source your own product?
So we have 200 plus open source
Only
projects.
200 plus?
Yeah. If you go to github.com/VMware, you can see our projects. And they span a wide range of topics. So one of our most successful ones is a software design system called Clarity that allows you to build HTML5 UIs based on Angular. And it's very successful. A lot of design companies have started using it. Some of our partners have started using it. Some of our competitors have started using it. And all this interaction around this project has made this a better design system. And as a result, we have better UIs for our products. So this is a typical open source, use the brilliance of the community, the collaborative efforts of the community to make your own internal tools better. And a lot of what we've open sourced is in this segment of tools that we use, tools that are broadly useful. We have a memory analyzer tool called CHAP, which helps you analyze core files to find memory allocation errors. So it's a lot of this type of software, but we also have open sourced, for example, some of the SDKs that you can use to integrate with our infrastructure. So with vSphere automation, for example. So open sourcing our projects for us is something where we think about how to build community, how to reach more people, how to create value for our customers and partners, but for the larger community. We have not taken the step of thinking of our own products as an open source project plus services. Because that's not traditionally been our business model, and that's not been something that our customers have actually asked us for. So we have this underlying set of products and services that we sell, and we think of open source as a great way to engage around the tools that we use to build all that.
So can you tell us what is the new kind of, at VMware after your arrival, how do you deal with open source, how you decide to open source, and how do you approach that? Community is more, kind of open about the open source.
So for us, open source is something that we are part of. We consider this a we the community, we engage in these things. And as you say, Vic, Harbor, Admiral, those are projects that we have created in order to augment what we can do with vSphere, with our infrastructure products. And those, for example, are indeed sold products where you can get a productized version of our own project, but they're all built around the idea of how can I deploy a container on a specific vSphere environment. And then if you take the next step and you think about orchestration, we have something like PKS, which is a joint product.
I wrote about a story about PKS also a few days ago.
Yeah, so it's a pivotal VMware shared product that is all about the ability to actually deploy Kubernetes in an easy, reliable fashion on premises in a vSphere environment. And again, it's one of those, you take an innovation that has happened in open source and you make it easy for people to then actually use it.
So when you talk about PKS and because they're like also, you can have productized version, how do you maintain, with the upstream? Because I think with PKS, the Kubernetes is fully upstream. It's not, kind of. So how do you kind of ensure that, everything is always upstream?
So we have a philosophy of integrated engineering teams, so that the people who are focused on upstream and the people who are focused on the productization are actually in the same team, reporting up into the same management chain. And there is a strong desire to minimize technical debt, because every time you have your private branches that have your own changes, it becomes harder and harder to follow the speed of upstream. And it becomes very easy to get trapped in a situation where upstream has a fix for something that you need, but you need to first forward port or back port your technical debt before you can apply this to your product. So you put yourself at a disadvantage doing that. So that is a very strong focus on ensuring that what we do in the product stays close to what's in upstream.
Internally, what kind of processes are there for VMware developers? So when they either touch a project, or whether it's contribution or consumption, so that there is some kind of legal support, so they don't have to worry about, what license is that? Can you talk about that?
So I'll start with all my pet peeves. I hate the term consumption, because consumption is something that you do to a commodity. I plug into the outlet and I consume the electricity. I don't care where it comes from. It's just there. Open source doesn't work that way. You use an open source project, an open source component, but ideally you should engage with that community. Hopefully you'll contribute to it, but at least you should engage with them. So the term consumption is one that I think creates that incorrect connotation that you don't need to care where it comes from. That little pet peeve aside.
Thank you, because I will keep in mind also in future also.
That little pet peeve aside. So I think the core of having an internal process that allows people to stay compliant both in use of open source components and in contribution to these projects is something that is very, very important for any open source program office to start out with. So we have an internal set of tools that have been around since long before I joined, and that we have been slowly reworking in the 20 months since I've been at VMware. And it has literally these two different aspects of what are the legal and procedural hurdles to get across before you can contribute to a project. And we try to streamline this as much as possible. So it's a very simple review process. Depending on the type of contributions, legal may get involved from a patent perspective. But in general, it's very quick. It's a BU manager and the chief open source officer, myself. And we very typically have 48-hour turnaround times when people want to contribute fixes to code. And then on the other side, we have a little more elaborate system to track our use of open source component. And we track every component that we use in every product, in every version that we ship. And we have a one-to-one mapping between these components. And there is a legal review of the licenses. We are automating a lot of this where it's obvious, but we are finding, as has been a topic in so many conversations here, that many projects don't have licenses that are as clear-cut and as well documented and as easy to automate as you might hope. So there's a lot of work that is still going on to make this easier, make this lower overhead. Today, I would say we are very good at being correct, but we are not very good at being efficient in doing that. So we are spending more time and more effort in manually interacting with these tools than I would like us to. But on the flip side, we are currently very much erring on the side of we want to make sure this is correct. We don't want to be in a situation where something slips through.
And today when we see everybody's using open source, but one new challenge that has popped up is that the people who use open source, I will not use the word consumption, people who use open source, sometimes they don't understand how it works. Do you see that problem?
So I think we are in an environment where a lot of the tooling that is out there hides a lot of this complexity, and it hides the complexity to the detriment of the companies that are engaging. So if you look at the container space, there are so many, quote, best practices in the container space that actually are terrible practices. Where people, if you talk to people, you know, what are the licenses of all the components that are included in this container? They can't answer the question. You know, this has GPL components. Where is the corresponding source? We don't know. And if you analyze the official containers for a lot of the large open source projects that are out there, so you go to Docker.io, you download the Docker file, and there are really, really poor practices in them that make it nearly impossible to actually provide corresponding source. And so I think companies that go into this space today without having a clear understanding of what it takes to be compliant with the licenses potentially could be in for a lot of trouble. And I think the community and some of the interested companies in this space aren't doing enough to really address that. It is not a simple topic. And especially, and again, we come back to the serverless conversation of earlier, there is so much that we do in going ever more abstraction levels up, that you write this 3-line function that you run and you don't realize just how much software is involved at the back end. And depending on how you then package what you do with this, how much of this do you end up distributing without knowing it?
That's true.
And so I think there is a lot for people to learn, a lot for this industry to do better in ensuring that this is possible. So we had a talk from Nisha Kumar, one of the engineers in my Open Source Technology Center here, who talked about Turn, which is a VMware project that helps you do just that, so that can analyze Docker files and then extract from it information about which packages, which license, where's the corresponding source. So this is a community project. Today, it can handle a number of typical constructs in Docker files, but there's a lot more work that could be done there. And I hope that with her presentation here, we get more people to contribute and to make it more powerful and more capable of analyzing Docker files and helping people to create correct compliance information. And then on the other hand, this is not only a compliance problem, this is also a security problem. Because if you have a Docker file that downloads, you know, this is the typical construct, wget something, something, something from the internet, pipe bash. Great. So what did you just run? You don't know. or downloading random binaries and including them into the container. Very, very common thing to happen. But of course, then when your customer asks you, what are you shipping to me? You don't know.
You don't even know, yeah.
So we at VMware have a policy that things have to be built internally, and we have to have source for every component that's included in a container. So you can't just randomly download images. You have to be able to recreate them. And we have just processes in place to ensure, just from an IT infrastructure, that people stick with these rules and that we ship products that are A, compliant, and B, have solid security practices around them.
We are seeing so much open source going on, but then look at future. You know, we are heading toward the fourth industrial revolution. Everything is being powered by software-defined everything, IoT, and everything sort of. What role do you think open source is going to play in that world?
You read a lot about the fourth industrial revolution. I chuckle about this because there's a lot of hand-waving involved and a lot of making up terms involved. But fundamentally, if you look at the how every company is becoming a technology company, and most value chains are being digitized, and how from the very edge of devices, you know, we keep talking about IoT, right, all the way to the core of the data center, everything is becoming a software problem. And open source is at the core of most everything that we do here. And in many ways, that's a good thing because it democratizes access to the technology. But of course, this also causes concerns because it's so easy to think something that works on my laptop should work at scale. And so often it doesn't. So open source has a lot of promise, a lot of opportunity, a lot of massive impact on the way that we innovate. But open source also is, in a way, the gateway to a lot of risk. And if I look at the large distributed denial of service attacks we had last year, where people would use Linux-based webcams that had a hard-coded password on a port that was open to the internet, and no one was able to update the firmware because the company had gone out of business. So these situations where the fact that it's open source, the fact that people can look at the sources actually created attack vectors. That is worrying. As always with revolutions, as always with technological advances, you have to be careful not to overpromise and underdeliver. I think it's really important to make sure that you understand the components of the technology that you base your business on, and that you understand what are the implications of what I do, what are the unintended side effects. So I love the speed of innovation that we see in open source. I love the community around all this. Open source very much is about people, it's about relationships, it's about all this. But I also worry sometimes about this train getting away from us and the innovation becoming so fast and so furious that we leave things behind. And security is one that I am most worried we might be leaving behind.
That's true, yeah. Thank you so much. You know, it was really, I mean, I love the conversation. I think we covered a lot of wide topics. And as usual, you know, it was first time we were sat together, so it's a memorable interview as well.
Yeah, no, I'm very much looking forward to see what you do out of this.
Thank you.